So Ashton messaged me probably like November, December, asking if I'd be interested in doing the session, and at first I just kind of laughed. Like,
But yeah, she didn't.
are you sure? Like, are you sure you want me to do teens, dating, sexuality? Like, why in the world would you ask me to do that? And then I got thinking, okay, I kind of have a lot to say on the topic. I have spent almost 10 years in the classroom, and almost all of those have been with 7th through 12th graders. Spent about half of those with junior high kids and about the other half with high school. On top of that, my second year as a teacher, my 15-year-old sister moved into my house and stayed with me to finish high school. And so when Daniel and I got married, we decided we were going to do foster care. And I ran into a former student that was on the Free to Adopt site for Mississippi. We became parents to a 16-year-old. And if you know anything about parenting, it challenges the marriages in ways you've never even thought it would. And with a teenager, it's a whole different set of rules. So we have very different, untraditional like parenting experience. We just kind of jumped in it and went with it. So feel free to do your own research, to come up with your own theories and practices. I'm going to kind of tell you what our experiences have been like and what I've seen in the classroom. So, what do you feel like our goal as parents is?
I just said I want them to feel comfortable enough to be able to come and talk to us, and no matter what's going on.
To survive until they're married and not strangle them?
Survive.
That was my time to survive.
Survive. Yeah.
That's kind of fun.
We have a term for that with first year teachers. They get to a point where they're no longer like caring about the pedagogy. They're no longer caring what's actually. They don't want to survive. And as parents, we're all going to have those moments. They happen. You just want to get through another day. Any other goals?
I just put that I want my children to feel like to be loved and safe, and I want to just prepare them for to be adults.
Which kind of leads into, what do you think the purpose of the teenage years?
Test boundaries.
I don't like this. Learn to function more as an adult and just to their maturity. And maturity.
Yeah.
How old are yours, Beth?
13, 12, 3, and 3 months.
I think your teenage years kind of prepare you for life. A lot of what you go through in high school, you go through all life, just on a different scale.
And even parts of it in elementary school, like right now, Anna Kate complains because so-and-so may be mean to her, so-and-so said this, and I have to tell her, and you're not going to like everybody all the time, and that's okay to be different. People, your whole life, there's going to be somebody that you're not going to get along with. You just have to suck it up and move on.
One of the lessons upstairs in the youth room, either last week or the week before, was literally started out, life is not fair. And it's just one of those things where all the kids are like, what? Like, are you sure, Josh? Like, is that what you meant? Like, are you sure? Mm-hmm. And those are hard lessons for them to learn.
That made me think about dealing with change. That's another, like preparing them for adulthood is to deal with changes in your life.
Yeah, I think one of mine is to expose our children to appropriate things to hear from us first before they hear it from their peers. Like sex, drugs, whatever. We want them to hear it from us first, and we have a 5th grader.
You better be quick, girl.
No, the other day,
You're there.
You better be quick.
well, we've had the conversation. We had it this summer, and our daughter, we're blessed with a good group of girls in her grade that are and still playing Barbies and innocent. And I have friends who had 11 and 12-year-olds and were like having boyfriends and talking about like sex and that kind of stuff. So we're not there yet, but I do want, that's our goal is, Amanda Boone gave us a good book she got off Amazon about a Christian way to expose your children to, sex and what it is and body parts. So, because they didn't have, Michael Anson didn't know. He had it all wrong.
I think a lot of your teenage years, you learn how to deal with failure. And I think you deal with a little bit of that your whole life. But that's really when you're first exposed to it. Like, I just think, like, trying out for cheerleader and homecoming maid and, trying to get into this club or this club. you realize like you might not get everything, and that's okay because it makes you who you are.
All right, so we've already started throwing out some ages. When do you think teenage years actually starts?
2.
Terrible 2. See, I'm there. Terrible 2.
Yeah.
And then everything else.
I would say late elementary school.
11.
Yes,
Nine,
that's what I think. Before that,
11,
15 years.
Not
Mine's 11
13.
now.
I was gonna say around puberty.
Yeah.
It's like that could be anywhere.
All right, so this is a timeline of psychological changes
Oh my goodness.
and some biological changes. So these are from a couple of different resources. So they're not, all the timelines don't match up. But again, being a teacher, I had to go get, and a science one, I had to go get some facts. Because I have lots of opinions, but I needed somebody to back me up. Because you don't want to just listen to me tell my opinions. So puberty can start as early as 8 to 9. And that's literally just physical changes. But we'll start to see children seek relationships outside of homes, ask for sleepovers. They're going to start extending their social circle beyond what you define for them. Before that, I mean, you pretty much had all control over their life. With the exception of what times, if you, school times where they might have stuff outside of your control. By 10 to 12, we start to see a different brain development, and they start to question authority figures or rules. They start developing the capacity to argue or sarcasm. They're going to be able to consider other viewpoints. Now, not everyone develops at the same time. Having taught junior high, you can kind of tell. Beginning of 7th grade, some of them just don't get sarcasm. By the end of the year, I could make some quirky comments, and I could see the ones that got me in the class, and the others are still clueless. And that just happens because not everybody develops the same. And that's totally normal. And then 13 and on, we kind of see this whole, everything shifts. They're more focused on peer influences. They're more focused on body image, relationships, how the outside stuff defines them. And they're trying to figure out who and what they are and just self-exploration. At 14, we start seeing them more distance themselves from parents and maybe from the set of values that you established. It doesn't mean specifically with faith that they're not going to stick with it. It just means they're going to define it themselves. So if you haven't laid a really thick faith-based background for them by 14, it's almost impossible to pick it up afterwards. And then by 16, they're almost autonomous with how they view the world, how they view themselves, and the things around them. Doesn't mean they still can't be influenced. It's just harder for you to get through. And again, if you have that relationship already established, it's not the end of the world. They're going to come to you. If most of us look back at who we call when we have an issue, it's still our parents, right? Right? You still call your parents. And that's the kind of relationship I think we all want for our children, is the fact that they are going to reach out to us when they need us. Almost everything y'all said to answer those first two questions are great, and we're going to talk about those some more. That was just to get you thinking. Again, biological, physiological response. This is all really normal. We tend to think of them whole challenging authority and their capacity to argue as negative things. That's not. Basically around 13, and that's the whole point of this. This is a graphic comic representation of the brain. Don't think that's an actual one. But it just kind of describes all the different things that a teen's brain might be absorbed or confused with. And
Yeah.
things have kind of shifted. We used to think of adolescence as just a time of change. And I read a really cool article on Focus of the Family that described it as the brain as a construction zone. Basically said, think about how your child's brain is developing areas that have previously not been developed. So the social part of their brain is all of a sudden turned on, and it hasn't been. All of a sudden their logical, argumentative, social, logical thought brain is turned on. And think of it like a remodel in your house. Sometimes the electricity works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I have a kitchen, sometimes I don't. Sometimes the water's on, sometimes everything's just wonky. I don't have access to the things that I want. That's what's happening to their brain. So sometimes they're logical, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're a mini adult, and other times they're a 5-year-old in a 17-year-old's body. And those are all normal. It's just their brain is almost like short-circuited every 5 minutes or so. It's just, you never know what version of your kid you're going to get. And that's just because their brain is growing at a really, really rapid rate once they hit that 12 to 13 window. childhood comes to a natural end by 13, and that's normal. I was really surprised to find that until the 1940s, we didn't use the word teenager or teens. It wasn't until after World War II they started defining that teenage era. And before then, they thought more, again, they were settling down, having families, they were participating in apprenticeships. We can't imagine our kids or us settling down at 13 or 14 anymore. So this teenage time period of that 12, 13 to 18 or sometimes 21 or 24, they're extending adolescence all the way to there. They're going through this change, and a good way for us to think about it is an adult in training. That's what they are. That's the way we're to kind of see this time period. I like to tell my daughter you're an adult with training wheels because she thinks she's grown up. She thinks she can make adult decisions, and she's ready to make adult decisions. And when she would question us on authority or parenting issues, a lot of times I'd be like, you're an adult with training wheels, because you do not want to make all of the decisions. You don't want to have to handle your health insurance. You don't want to have to handle your auto insurance. You don't want to have to deal with where your food's going to come from every meal of the day. That's why you're an adult with training wheels. I'm going to let you make some of the decisions, but I'm going to be there to help you. So bottom line, it's coming. That bouncing baby that we had that turned into that fun toddler and whatever else comes in between, because I'm not there yet, will turn into a teenager. And it's coming. And for each kid, it might be a little different when they hit those or they ask you those difficult questions. A couple years ago, we had a parenting conference, and in this room, actually, we had a similar discussion on when to start having difficult conversations with our children. Ironically, the guy that led the session was a gentleman, a youth minister that I had when I was doing summer camps in Mississippi years ago, and he had boys 8 and 9, and he said, you've got to start having those conversations early. Like, my boys and I were at a sports game, and we see two guys holding hands, and obviously they're a couple, and my kid's going to turn around and ask a question. If I haven't addressed that conversation before we're out in public, it might get embarrassing for both of us. I know the G's have been very open and honest about those kind of conversations with Jonathan already, and he's so young because he came home and noticed that someone had 2 mommies, and they had to have those kind of conversations. So I know we want to protect our children, but we also want them to live in the world and not be of the world. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. All right, so part 2. What were your teenage years like? So those are the green questions on the right side of the front page. What did you love, or what can you respect now that you're not in your parents' house about your parents' teaching or parents' ways of parenting you? Is there anything you wish your parents would have done differently? And what do you think it'll look like to parent a teenager?
I hope they're not.
It's okay to not have answers. I just want you to think about those questions for a minute. We've done a parenting conference for foster parents the last couple of years, and one of the things that really shocked me was them talking about your upbringing will definitely affect how you respond to your child, especially in a crisis kind of moment. Even if you had a relatively traditional, stable upbringing, there's still triggers for you, and you might respond extra harsh or just in an unusual way with your kids because it triggers a memory that you had from how your parents parented. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to answer those questions. All right, so what were you like as a teenager? My parents' favorite saying is that, you're going to get that payback one day for the way you treated us. Well, Daniel and I both were like, what do you mean? Because we were good kids. Like, we were quiet. We didn't get into a whole lot of trouble. I let my sister kind of finish breaking the mold. I was a quiet, introverted kid. He was the kind of kid they had to push out of the house to quit reading books. So when we got our daughter and everything was just kind of turned on its end, we had to learn a whole different style of parenting. What we thought we were going to do was not going to work. What about you?
It was hard to be a teenager. I think I have probably entered into it quite naive. And it was hard.
Yeah, I would never want to relive that.
No.
I don't even think I want to relive college. Like, I'm good.
I would
I'm ready
totally
move on.
go to college. I don't need to be a high school kid.
Yeah.
It was confusing. You're trying to figure out who you are, and you try to live up to what so many different people label you as. But it's hard. It was hard. I remember just not really knowing who I was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to be really good church girl for your parents, but then you might have a certain group of friends that maybe that didn't fit, and it kind of like a chameleon. You're just trying to figure out where you fit.
It's probably a good description of teenagers. And we see that a lot, especially with, I've seen that with some of our church kids, just how they act in public or at school and then how they act here.
Mm-hmm.
It happens.
Mm-hmm.
You're not sure who you are. You're not sure which version of yourself
Right.
to be. And that kind of goes back to that whole brain is under reconstruction. They don't really know who they are. They don't know what they want. And we're seeing that more and more. And particularly from our perspective, kids that come from traumatic backgrounds, they might chronologically be 18 or 19, but they're not really mentally there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really hard to tell them, I know you think you're 18, but you really aren't acting like 18. Like, you can't do the other things that 18-year-olds do. And that's really hard. Because there are a lot of kids that just don't mature the same. And it's hard to approach that as a parent. What are some things that your parents did that stand out to you?
The dating stuff. My parents were very, very strict on dating. Like, you couldn't date till you're 16, and even then it was very strict. So, and I think from a lot of...
And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes.
Demanding respect.
Mm-hmm. And that's something we really see a shift with this generation. As far as the classroom goes, that's not something they're normally taught. It's not something we push as much anymore either, because it's so hard to teach those values when they're not getting them at home.
My mom, she kept us busy, like with activities. Like, I would go horse riding with her, doing cheerleading, staying busy. And then my brother would go hunting and fishing with my dad. So, we were like separate. Like, my dad and brother would go off and do stuff, and my mom and I would go off and do stuff, but it was always something to do besides, just hang around and get in trouble. And as I got older in high school, I didn't want to hang out with her.
And that's normal. It's normal development. All right. I'm going to kind of skip forward and let you keep thinking about those last two questions, and let's go over to the back and strategies for communication. So the number one thing there is always stay calm.
I need to read this today.
Stay calm, no matter what.
Who is not?
Who? The kid?
No, because they're not going to be. And I will say this, and I will tell you that I've stayed calm when I thought I might get punched, when my child was throwing a temper tantrum and throwing furniture and dishes, and it's not easy. It's happened in my house, I promise. So I'm not telling you this, and I've had this perfect little angel at home. It's going to happen. But and I come from a house where my dad yelled and he got loud. He got louder. But I also had the benefit of being in a classroom. And the first year teacher, I was known as the yeller.
Yeah.
And it conditioned it out of me. It doesn't work. It does not work. The kids just escalate with you. I will tell you, nothing has diffused my daughter faster than maybe just, are you done? Are you ready for me to talk? Or I'm going to leave you here for a minute, and I'll be back in 10. and then we can have a discussion. Come back in 10 minutes. Oh, you're still not ready for that conversation? I'll give you 10 more. 10 more, I'll be back. I'm not going to let you sit in your room for an hour and stew. I'm going to take your headphones. You're not going to sit there and make it worse. But staying calm helps them. You don't give them ammunition. And they're going to throw it at you. Teenagers know how to push your buttons. It's not easy. I've been told everything from I never should have been adopted to I should have stayed where I was to I hate you. And she knows how to push buttons. And then she comes back 5 minutes later and was like, I'm dumb and I never should have said those things. And she doesn't even remember saying those things. And they're in the moment. And again, their brains are under remodel. They're not their true self at that moment. The other thing is just yelling can make it feel like you're a siren always going off. So they just tune you out. And we see the same thing with the next one. Number 2, don't lecture. Okay. In the classroom, I can't stand up in front of them and talk for more than 10 to 15 minutes without going around and asking them questions, kind of like I've done you, or breaking up the instruction because they tune me out. They're not listening anymore. It doesn't work. When Daniel and I first got married and we talked about how things work in the classroom, he's like, that's not the way my teachers taught, and that's not what I expected a teacher would do. And I'm like, teaching's changed. Kids will tune you out after 5 to 10 minutes. You can't sit in front of them and lecture. Actions definitely speak louder than words. They're going to remember what you say and how you respond to them a whole lot more than what you're actually saying in that moment when they're already mad. They're already tuned out. And for me, body language is a really easy thing to kind of read. My daughter's really good at telling me what she thinks I want to hear so that I'll shut up. And she knows. She's a chameleon, right? She knows how to give me what she thinks I want to hear so that I will leave her alone and she can finish stewing in silence. And lecturing just makes that worse. All right, so the next one is not any easier, I'm sorry. So we got to have our Elsa moment. Number 3, let it go. Daniel likes to sing the song whenever I say anything kind of like, let it go. But we can't always have control. We can't always have control.
Yes, I can.
I know. Whether you're letting them out of your house for the 1st or the 5th time with a set of keys, whether you're letting them go out with a group of friends that you really, really don't trust, but you've got to let them make some hard decisions, we can't always control every moment. And I will tell you this, I spent pretty much my entire college career, undergrad and grad school, working with freshmen and students in dorms at Mississippi College. Kids that had never been let out of their parents' sight, never been let off a long leash, and they went hog wild.
That was me.
There were a lot of girls that literally said, my parents said I can go this far from home and they would only let me come to Mississippi if I went to a Christian college, and they figured it was going to be this nice sheltered environment. Girls that had already been exposed to some things, they might have gone wild once or twice, but they usually kind of came back to their roots faster. And again, the Bible says train up a child in the way they should go, and they'll not depart from it. It's true, but if you've never let your kid off leash, that first time is going to be bad. And you don't want that to happen in a different city, at some college campus for the first time. You'd much rather that happen where you can keep an eye, where so-and-so is going to find you at Walmart and tell you they saw your kid do such and such. Or in my case, my kid posted something on Facebook and the entire world's already seen it, and I get a phone call. Have you seen such and such? Yes. Because again, their brain's not thinking when they post stuff on Facebook. So you'd much rather them do that when they're closer to you. And again, before that 18 age mark where you still have some kind of input in their life. And this kind of goes back to you, the whole, you talk about failure. Mm-hmm. So my favorite part of teaching 7th and 8th grade, I taught in a really rural school. I had all of the 7th graders and I had all of the 8th graders for science. So I had them broken in by 8th grade. Okay, parents knew me. They knew what to expect. The kids knew what they walked in. They were ready to go that first day of school. 7th graders, on the other hand, they had not really been able to change classes freely before. Mom was so worried, and just mom was, helicopter parenting a little bit. Those first progress reports came out every time. I was going to have a few kids that just tested me, right? And their grades were going to be lower than Mommy wanted. And Mommy was going to come up to school, and Mommy was going to be upset. And I had an awesome principal who would sit them down and be like, junior high kids kind of lose their mind. I need you to give my teachers some time to do their job. And he was great with parents, and really wish I could have been a fly on the wall with some of those conversations. But one of the things I've learned is that when they hit that time period, whenever it is, it may not be 7th, 8th grade, I need them to understand cause and effect. I need them to understand as a teacher that, you don't study for this quiz, you're going to fail it. Okay, you didn't study for the test either, you're going to fail it too. And I would always tell my parents, like, give me some time. I'm not going to forget about them. I'm not going to let them fail for the year just because they have one bad grade on their progress report. I'll let them retake it later. Can we just keep going? Like, give me a chance to work with your kid. And same thing as parents. We've got to let them have those moments. And it helps if you trust the people that are in control at the school. I totally understand that. I've got a taste of that myself. But even as parents, with our parenting decisions, we knew the phone was going to be a stressor for my kid. We knew the phone and the influences through the phone were going to be what fed her insecurities and could feed her in bad behavior. But she's 18, and we made a contract in August if she made it to Christmas without any disciplinary actions at school. If she showed us she was doing better, she's going to get a phone for Christmas. We knew that was going to be an issue, but we had to give her that chance because she's not going to be in my house all the time. She's going to have a phone. She's going to have outside influences at some point. And those influences may be good or bad. She's got to learn to deal with those. She's got to learn to control her impulses.
So what age do you give them a phone?
I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't do it until they're driving. But that's personal preference. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you what happened for me. I didn't get a phone until I was driving or if I was on like a sports trip, and I would get the phone for that night, and it would be given back. I was at a really, but again, phones weren't as common when I was coming up. I teach the 7th through 9th grade girls Bible study, Sunday school class, and I will tell you, phones is a problem. I've had to threaten to do phone jail, like I would in my classroom in our Sunday school class. Lexi's not one of those.
I was going to say, feel free to take it.
She's good.
I take
She's
it.
good.
That's the first tool.
But we do, and they're texting each other and making faces and think we don't notice. That's the fun part. Is they're really bad liars. They're really bad poker faces. But
they're in 2nd grade. I mean,
yeah.
My son thinks that everyone in his class has one.
Yeah,
because they all talk about they have the iPhone 10s, and I'm like,
I don't even.
We totally are like, if you don't need a phone, you're with me all the time.
I told my son, he told the kid that. He goes, my mama didn't get a cell phone until she was 21, and the kid goes.
So when our teenager came to us, her previous foster family had already bought her a phone. They took that decision away from us, and that was definitely something that got taken away as far as discipline comes. And it was a comfort item for her, and it was a big stressor. So we had to learn how to deal with that. She had some issues last spring and didn't have a phone until Christmas. So you have to make that decision for your child. Social media, I don't know if any of y'all came to the cyberbullying thing. I mean, it's awful. What the kids feel comfortable putting out there, what they read, what they're exposed to. I mean, that's going to be your bigger problem. You think your classrooms are going to, where your kids are out of your sight, your schools and stuff are going to be where they're exposed to stuff. It's worse online. It's way worse. Who they friend. My daughter has 2,000 and something friends on Facebook. She doesn't know most of them. I've seen her messages. I wouldn't even want to read some of those of grown men messaging her. So, I mean, you've got to teach your kids safe skills if you're going to let them have those apps, if you're going to let them have that freedom. We're not going to do devices until they're old enough to understand how to use them. And you'll have to make that decision when they're that age. Number 4, don't assume. The hardest part when your kid is yelling at you or when your kid's having a temper tantrum is trying to assume what's going through their mind. Because again, it's a construction zone. Whatever you think or why you think they did what they did is probably not the reason. And this has been the hardest part for me. I'm sitting there psychoanalyzing everything my kid's doing. I'm trying to think, okay, her trauma is this, and this is where this is coming from, and this is how I need to fix this, and it doesn't work. I mean, it just makes yourself more stressed. So be careful. Don't assume you know what they're thinking. We may never know, and they may not even know. The hardest part for my daughter sometimes was when she would get angry or upset, and then She wouldn't even know that she was angry or upset or frustrated. And I'm like, baby, you haven't sat still in 20 minutes. You've been bouncing your knee, popping your knuckles, or just like this the whole time. Like, you're agitated. Your body language is speaking so loudly right now. I didn't even realize. Okay, so what happened today? I don't want to talk about it. And then you just kind of keep going. You can't let it stop at that. But don't assume you know what's going on. I like this next one. Again, this one's from Focus on the Family as well. Our role as parents, and they say our main goal is to ask, listen, and respect. Ask, listen, and respect. I think if you've ever worked with young girls, you're going to have done this. But the first thing is ask. When they're in the moment, they're upset, they're frustrated, they're not talking to you. Sometimes our first instinct is to ask questions. Sometimes it's not. We want to make statements. But the beautiful thing of asking a question, even if it's just as simple as what happened today, or refocusing them on something else, asking them something that's totally a safe question, it shifts their brain from reaction brain to prefrontal cortex thinking brain. And so it just shifts their focus for a minute and makes them stop and think. So once you can get their attention, then you can move forward. All right, listen. So what is actually the problem? What is going on here? And then respect. It might be their 5th boy drama of the week, and it's only Wednesday. Okay? They might be having their 118th Chicken Little the sky is falling moment, and you really just want to tell them to suck it up. But we're not going to do that, right? It's really hard, right? We're not going to do that. We're going to ask, we're going to listen, and then we're going to show a little respect. They went on to say, don't minimize the situation. So it's really easy to say, you're not going to remember that boy's name in 2 years. You know, this is not going to, you're not going to be anything next week. You're going to totally be on a new guy, or this is going to be a different situation. Do empathize. I've counseled a lot of girls, whether they're college or high school, over the years, and even if you haven't gone through, and I say girls because girls tend to be the more dramatic ones, but even if you haven't gone through those situations, you can relate. You've had failures. You've had stuff happen. Just talk to them. Let them. They mostly just want to be heard. They just mostly want to feel that their drama is important. We know that teenagers go through a bunch of stuff, and most of the stuff they're not going to remember. They're not going to remember well. Recognize the loss. For you as well as for them, you don't have that toddler anymore. And you need to kind of grieve that and move on. There's something different. And that's okay, and it's normal, and it's natural. I've had a lot of people tell us that this is the way God designed them, so that you want to kick them out at some point. You do not want a 30-year-old living at home. They're not that cute baby anymore, because you need to push them out of the nest at some point. And this is the natural order of things. That doesn't make you feel better in the moment, but just know that you're not the only one going through this. Our parents and grandparents experienced a lot of the same things because the cultures were different than theirs. One of my favorites is this next strategy. It's their TBRI. It's trust-based relational intervention. Daniel and I, this is the website, childtcu.edu. It's by Dr. Karen Purvis, and it's trust-based relational interventions. We were in a moment of crisis. We had been parents for about 8 months, and we were on the way to this parenting conference to get our foster parent renewal hours, right, for our certificate. And I get a call from my sister, who's going to be babysitting. Did you leave your car at home, or did y'all take both cars? No, we definitely left a car at home, and my keys were on the table. Well, it's not here. And my 16-year-old, who does not have a driver's license, is out in the car. So you get tested, and you get tested in ways, and sometimes it all stacks up at once. And again, hopefully your parenting experiences won't be as dramatic as mine. But we found TBRI during that scenario. And I'm sitting there in this conference, and these psychologists and these therapists are getting up and talking about all these cool strategies and how the brain develops and how it's different, especially for kids from traumatic situations. And they start talking about strategies, and I'm like, that's just good teaching. Like, those are the things that good teachers do. And so I think it's something that applies in a lot of different scenarios. But there have been a lot we've used as parents, and it works with all kids. There are a lot of adopted families that use these strategies. They're like, we use these with biological non-traumatic situations as well as traumatic ones. But if you want more information, they have a great teens video. I actually have a copy. I think the G's have it now. We'll gladly circulate some of that. My favorite part of this is they do a lot of younger kid interventions. They used to do a summer camp, and they bring them in and kind of rehabilitate them and send them back home with their families. But then people were like, that's not going to work with teens. And they went into juvenile detention centers and rehabilitated teens that came from some of the worst environments you could ever imagine. And it works. It works. Kids that you wouldn't expect to show respect to anyone, be gentlemanly and courteous, and talk about their feelings and let you know what's going on. So our kids hopefully aren't going to be exposed to all that trauma, and they're going to be way much more adjusted. But here's some cool strategies for you. The first one's called redos. And this is one of my favorites because there are times where I can have a smart mouth, and there are times when I'm not going to stay calm, and I'm just going to let it fly. And I'm going to ask for a redo. I'm going to come back to my kid and be like, hey, I need to have that conversation again. I did not handle it. And in reality, the kid may have handled it way worse than I did, but I'm going to be the bigger person because who's the adult in the situation? Me. So who should act like the adult in the situation? Me. I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask for a redo. But we're teaching our kids to do the same thing. You're teaching them skills. So when they have a relationship blow up later, they're going to come back and ask for a redo. This is one we do a lot in the classroom, Lynn and Claire, giving choices and voices. We do this with Alexander. He doesn't want to get dressed in the morning, so I'm going to pick out 2 shirts, and you're going to get to pick one of those, right? Same thing works with teenagers. Giving them an input in their discipline, and that kind of comes with humor. Compromises. Whenever we would have issues with our daughter, and we would be like, here's your discipline, here's your consequence for your action, and use the word consequence. It helps teach them cause and effect. Not, this is your punishment. Use the word consequence. And she would get mad, and she'd be furious. And we'd be like, if you want to discuss your compromise, door slam. We'll be here for about 10, 15 minutes, or, come back and talk to us. And sure enough, she'd come back, and she'd be like, man, okay, so what if I do really good for the next 2 weeks? Can we shave off it a couple days? Can we shave off a week? Or if I do this, and this? And so she would start thinking about how to rehabilitate herself. So that's teaching them skills, coping skills. So giving them a choice, but also giving them a compromise. I don't always have to say yes to their compromise. I just have to hear them out. I have to listen with respect. Sometimes it was really good compromises. And sometimes they were better than what I worked out to be. Sometimes they're harsher than what I was going to give the first time. Kids are really good at doing that to themselves. Another one with teens and the whole respect thing, they'll come in and tell you they're going to go somewhere, or they're going to come in and they're going to say, so-and-so's having a party, bye. No, are you asking or are you telling? And that's a really easy way to have them rephrase it and realize what they're doing to you, that they're denying you the respect that you deserve as a parent. And this is a really easy one, just, are you asking or are you telling? I mean, it makes them stop and rephrase, shift brain, and move forward. So before we run out of time, let's shift to the more difficult topics. Dating and sexuality. All right, so I kind of came up through the end or the beginning of the I Kiss Dating Goodbye era with Joshua Harris. And he basically published this bestseller Christian book on courtship is the way to go. You shouldn't even date. And it's this whole scenario of, two kids should work through their parents. It should be a family decision of whether they get to date or not. You shouldn't, date until you're ready to marry kind of thing. That's an ultra-conservative view that really went around for almost 10 years, if not longer. I think he said 20 on his video. He now feels so strongly against what he put out there that he has stopped the reprinting of his book. There's a lot of stuff out there on Christian dating and just what adults should do as far as Christian dating. So one of the things I loved about my relationship with my parents was that my mom was very honest with me from the beginning. I can remember going through picture boxes at my grandmother's. Hey, Mom, here's you in a cap and gown and you're holding me. Was this your college graduation? No, baby, that was high school. Did I miss something here? My mom was very open and honest with me from the beginning that I was born in January and she graduated high school in May. My parents got married the summer of her junior year, after her junior year. And that was kind of the version of the story I got when I was really young. Okay, I'm like 7th, 8th grade. I'm taking a human development class, gestational age of a baby. Mom, I think you missed something, right? So they got married in June, and I was born in January. But anyway, so we had another conversation, right? My mom is now in nursing school at the time, and she literally like pops out a nursing book and gives me a very scientific definition of boys and girls and birds and bees, and says, you know, very honest. I mean, I did not save sex for marriage. And you are a beautiful part of my family, and I thank God every day that He gave me you. But you know, I did things out of His order. I also had the benefit of seeing the effects of that on 2 young people becoming parents that are really young age, and then trying to go back to school. My mom went back to school twice. First time with 2 kids. I graduated kindergarten. She graduated LPN school. The second time with 3 kids. Again, I think Tabitha was getting ready to graduate kindergarten. She got her RN license. But my mom had an awesome supportive family that helped her through all of that. I stayed with my grandparents a lot while my mom finished high school. They were kind of like my second home, and I was spoiled rotten for a really long time. But they couldn't have done that without their support system. But my mom had an open, honest line of communication with me. We talked about expectations. We talked about belief systems. We talked about what the Bible says about sex and saving sex for marriage. My mom also made sure that I felt comfortable coming back to her if I made a mistake. And I think that's the biggest part of our relationship. Y'all all kind of talked about that. We want our kids to feel comfortable with us. We don't want them to hide from us because they're going to make some mistake. Hopefully it's not sex before marriage, but they're going to make some mistake, and you want them to feel comfortable coming back and talking to you. I was fortunate enough that my mom made sure we had that kind of relationship, and that's an important part of that. Shifting focus, conservative Christians really have a very different stance on dating and what they believe to be acceptable. Our kids right now are exposed to a whole lot. We see 6th and 7th graders that are going out with a boy. They show up to youth group with a boy in tow, and it's just considered totally normal. I fully believe that dating is for the purpose of marriage. If you're not ready to get married, then you're not ready to date. I have told that over the last decade to a bunch of different Bible studies and girls, and they don't all share the same opinions. And I tell them that's fine. You've got to figure out what you believe. But I mean, that I wasn't ready to get married at 21 or 24. I mean, there's no way I was ready for those things. I literally dated one kid in high school and realized that dating was stupid for me. I was at a totally different place than most of the boys at my high school. I had totally different plans on my mind. By the way, I moved twice to 3 different high schools in 4 years. So it wasn't worth it for me to get attached. I was totally a logical kid, and I took the logical way out, and that was really different. But I also got to watch my sister serial date. So like from the age that you can, you know, boy and girl think you're cute, she had a different one on her arm like every week. And I was just like, this is dumb. This is not for me. So I got to learn from other people's mistakes. I think the trick is going to be having those conversations with our kids early on. If we set up that expectation that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's our biblical belief, and that dating is for the purpose of marriage, and you're not ready to get married, baby, so you're not ready to date. If we set up those expectations earlier, it's going to make these kind of conversations easier. And we do have some really great girls in our youth group. Again, I teach more of the girls, so I can't speak for the boys. But they do grow up in those environments, and we can see that. They have a different kind of maturity. They're not walking around trying to get all the little boys' attention because they're taught differently. One of the favorite Bible verses I put on here, if I can find it. Okay, I may not be able to find it. But it's one of Paul's writings, and it talks about how we're to treat people of the opposite sex, and basically just says girls are to be like our sister and our mothers. Boys are to be like our brothers and our fathers. Okay, it is on there. Oh yes, 1 Timothy. That's a biblical standard for how we're to treat each other. And that's echoed a lot through a lot of the focus on the family teachings, as well as a lot of other Christian dating sites. If you're not dating for the purpose of marriage, then we're to treat everyone like brothers and sisters. That's how our interactions should be. Again, that's a really conservative ideal that our kids are not getting exposed to. And you've got to start those ideas early, that everyone's to be like our brothers and our sisters, and we're to treat them kindly. It kind of, I guess you can kind of pinpack that into like the golden rule, you know, how you teach them to interact with other people. But those conversations have to start early. All right, so Dr. James Dobson, Focus on the Family, is probably one of the loudest proponents for teen and dating. I've seen this sentiment echoed a lot through the research, and he basically says no one-on-one dating until they're 18. But he also says gauge that appropriately. If you don't feel like your kid's mature enough at 18, you do what you got to do. But he also says group dating at 16, 17. There's a couple different resources there. But before that, dating shouldn't even be on the table. They shouldn't be going out, talking. That's the big thing right now, is we're just talking. But you're talking with the intent to date this person. You're filling this person out to see if they're a potential dating partner. So that's pre-dating, whatever you want to call it. That is dating. They make new terms for it, I think, every 4 or 5 years, and they try to roll with it. So be prepared. They have their own terms for everything, and you're just going to have to keep asking questions until you figure out what language y'all both speaking, because it's going to feel different. The big thing with Christians is to mingle and socialize in groups, and this even extends into young adult and college age. What a lot of the teen date or Christian dating articles kind of reference more young adults, but you shouldn't be solely focused on a significant other, and that's the whole point of those things. I know we're about to run out of time. I always tell kids when I'm in Bible studies or Disciple Nows and we're talking about these kind of topics that it's okay to be single. And we don't always have a lot of great examples of that. I literally dated the one kid in high school, and then I didn't date anybody else for over a decade. Daniel and I didn't start dating until like 6 months after it's 10 years, my 10-year mark. It wasn't like it was intentional. I didn't go in with that focus. I had a few guy friends in college, and we might have gone out for dinner, and then we just never materialized in anything. We stayed friends, and that was amazing. There wasn't as much pressure in the friendship because we were friends and we stayed friends. Our girls and guys are not being exposed to that. There's so much pressure to pair off. There's so much pressure to have a significant other. There's so many kids that define their self-image and who they're with. And that's something that's been going on for generations, and it's not like it's going to be an easy fix. But we've got to make sure our kids know that it's okay to be single. There's a lot of books out there for older teens and young adults on singleness and being okay being single and using that time to grow closer to God. That was a really huge push about 15 years ago. So I don't know if you really ever want to read Joshua Harris's book, but he mentions several on his website that he recommends. And one of the other ones I can recommend is Leslie and Eric Ludy. They wrote several books together as couples and as singles on just how to handle that time to yourself, that time being single for older teenagers. So when you get to that, there's a lot of resources, but we have to start early talking to our kids about what dating is supposed to look like, what dating should be. They're exposed to so much. I can't tell you, I have a classroom of almost all boys this year, and I've heard some very lewd happenings that go on, and they're exposed to so much. And they think that's normal. We have to stand up and say that we're Christians and we are called to live in the world but not be a part of it. We are called to live a different life. And that starts early with our kiddos. I know those conversations aren't easy. And just as far as sexuality is concerned, we've had this problem with kids in our youth group that struggle with it, and kids in my family. And the best thing I can tell you is to love them through it. We hate the sin and love the sinner. And that's the image that I've always told my kids, and that's the image that my family has always pushed with those that believe and live differently. I will say there are some really good Christians in our church that have a harsher stance on that. They don't even want to worship with someone that has a different sexuality or sexual orientation. They don't want to be in the same room with them. And I believe, and I know that Jesus and I have talked about this a lot, that's not how God called us to live. We're to love those kids. We're to love on those families, and that's the model that Jesus gave us, is to love them through it. I have had kids come up to me and say they struggle with those things, and the best thing I can do is just, all right, here's what I believe, here's what the Bible says, but you have to make your decision. At some point, our kids will have to make their decisions about what they believe about dating and sexuality and sex before marriage. We can't push our opinions on them forever. So you need to take the opportunities while they're young to instill those values. Like I said, at 16, their family religious values are almost set. If you haven't talked about those things early on, you're going to miss the window. Thank y'all for letting me talk to you about these things. And if you're ever curious, I promise if you Google some resources, you're going to find some stuff. I will say Focus on the Family, I think, were my favorites and were some of the most in-depth. They also recommend lots of books. So feel free to reach out to the parents around you that you know are going through the same stuff. That's been the hardest thing for us, is just having other people to talk to and kind of be like, hey, you won't believe she did this, and hey, we're going through this. And I'm lucky and fortunate enough that I work with some really awesome Christian ladies that have grown children and can hold my hand and walk me through some of this.
Teacher friends like best friends.
There they are, because they see you through some of the most interesting things. If you're interested in any of the TBRI stuff, I have some posters, mini posters they have up here, just about how to handle children and behavior. But thank y'all.